welcome to Thursday's weekly Wellbeing lunch, and thank you so much for joining us again. I'm Emma Bridger, founder of People Lab, and I'm joined by Justin, who will introduce himself in a minute, Justin McCarran, and my colleague Katie Austin. And we're running these every week to really share some hopefully helpful resources, ideas, tools, tips on how we can look after our own well-being whilst we're in this quite mental situation, or for me, Groundhog Day, and it's becoming more and more relevant for me every week. And I'm actually really looking forward to these sessions every week. It's a really nice bit of respite from the kind of continual kind of sort of heavy Zoom meetings that many of us are on. So hopefully you're finding them interesting and helpful too. So we're going to focus this week on emotional intelligence. I've got some slides as usual to share with you, some resources. But before we do that, for those of you that are new, just a little bit of background. So as I said, I run People Lab. We are an employee experience and engagement consultancy, helping businesses to create great experiences that result in engagement. So basically making the world of work a better place for people. I'm not going to do kind of big sell on People Lab today. That's not what today is all about. But my background is a psychologist by trade, and more latterly positive psychologist, and really passionate about the area of positive psychology, and always up for learning more. So those of you on the call that have got resources and tools and tips and ideas, get on the chat and share them. So I'm joined today, as I have been the last 2 weeks, by my wonderful co-host Justin, who I describe now, who should evermore be known as a resilience guru, as he does a lot of other stuff as well. But Justin, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself to people that have perhaps not joined us before?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So for those of you that I don't know, hello and welcome. And for those of you that have been regular participants on these calls, welcome back. And yes, so Resilience Guru is a title that has been afforded to me. It's not one I would choose myself necessarily, but of course, all compliments are welcome. I am a resilience specialist, which means I spend all of my time, most of my time anyway, reading about, researching and trying out resilience techniques. And I help individuals and organizations help themselves and their people discover their own innate inner resilience. And that is one of the things I do, and that's the capacity that I'm here in today as a resilience coach.
Cool. Thanks, Justin. So as per previous weeks, use the chat, get involved, give us feedback, talk to us, let us know what you think. To get us started though, we're going to get Katie to launch a poll. We do this poll every week just to kind of see how you're feeling, really. So if you could launch the poll, Katie, that would be brilliant. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling today? So just have a go at that, and we'll see where everyone's heads are at today. There's no right or wrong answer, obviously. If you're anything like me, I'm going through a kind of a roller coaster of emotions on a day-to-day basis. It's not even good days and bad days. It's everything in one day. Oh, I got quite a lot of positivity today. I wonder if the sunshine helps. It's interesting. Maybe we're just getting a bit more used to this, sorry to say it, new normal. Perhaps we're just kind of feeling our way with it now a little bit, and it's starting to settle in. That's really interesting though, isn't it? That's quite different results to the past couple of weeks. So yeah, okay. So today, what we're going to talk about is emotional intelligence, which is a fascinating subject. I'm going to share some slides. I think where I have to talk and do something at the same time, which I'm not very good at these days. Right, and I'm going to pull some slides up. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So everyone can see that okay? Yeah? Justin, can you see that? Has everybody gone to mute?
It's all good, it's working.
Awesome. Okay. So, emotional intelligence. It's a fascinating area. And it's really interesting with this whole area of positive psychology, because it's not neat, positive psychology or psychology in general. It's not neat. It's not like we've got this really neat kind of, array of different kind of subject areas that fit in very specific places. Everything kind of overlaps with everything else. So we'll talk about emotional intelligence today, but you'll see how it overlaps in terms of promoting well-being, how it helps to build resilience. So all these different concepts we're talking about every week are hopefully building up your kind of capability and your understanding in these different areas, and they all kind of overlap with each other. So emotional intelligence, you know, it's been around for a number of years, and Daniel Goleman was the first person to sort of publish a book on emotional intelligence, and you know, it's gained in popularity since then. And there's lots of different lots of different definitions out there, but here's one for you here. But I kind of think about emotional intelligence. It's kind of multifaceted. It's not just about being able to recognize and understand your own emotions, but it's also being able to regulate them. So it's not enough just to say, I'm really bloody angry right now. It's about thinking, well, what can I do with that anger? And how can I make sure it isn't a force for destruction? It's a force for good, and I can learn from it. So it's that kind of regulation and that self-reflection. And there's also, one facet of emotional intelligence is kind of really about yourself and your own emotions, and recognizing, all of the stuff that's going on within you. But the other side is it's a social aspect. So it's about being able to recognize emotions in others, be able to read others, and kind of just figure out what the right response in certain situations. And it's about being able to not just recognize the emotions in others, but be able to kind of build relationships with others. So it's kind of multifaceted. So if you've got different ideas on what it is, it's not a single universal definition, as there never is with any of these concepts in psychology. But let us know in the chat what you think about emotional intelligence, how you would define it. Why is it important? There's again a whole range of studies that show that people that have higher emotional intelligence, sometimes called EQ rather than IQ, are able to better manage these aspects here. So if we have higher EQ, it tends to impact positively on our physical health. So people that have lower EQ, that don't have the emotional intelligence that they could have, tend to, for example, have higher blood pressure. From a physical health point of view, more likely to experience stress, which impacts immune system responses. So if you have good EQ, you have a better immune system response. From a mental health point of view, it's pretty obvious to see the link between EQ and things like depression, being able to kind of manage those sorts of conditions. And relationships. So people that have higher EQ tend to have better relationships because they're able to figure out, why they're feeling what they're feeling. Because, relationships are, human beings are very messy, complicated people, and relationships aren't static, and they kind of wax and wane, and there's different feelings and emotions running around. And sometimes you react in a certain way, and being able to understand what that reaction is and regulate it and understand reactions of other people and their emotions, it does help to build, more effective, connected relationships. So absolutely is important. In terms of this model here, again, the research shows that actually IQ isn't a particularly good predictor of success in life generally. EQ is far more valid in terms of predicting people's success at work, people's success in relationships, people's general happiness and well-being. It is a much more important concept and idea and skill than IQ. And as I'll always say in all of these lunches, the great thing about EQ is it's not fixed in stone. So when you study psychology, study IQ, and there's a little bit of debate around this, but to a greater degree, your IQ is fairly fixed. And yes, you can do some brain training and get a bit better and stuff, but you're not going to shoot up hundreds of points in IQ. EQ is not like that. EQ is something we can absolutely teach ourselves. We can develop it. We can work on our EQ capability, our EQ muscle. So it's great news, because if you are a bit lacking in EQ, you can learn to be better at it. It's something that it really resonates with me, the whole emotional intelligence piece, because I share a house with two of the 5 members of our family are Asperger's, my husband and my eldest son, and this is not something that comes naturally to them. I don't want to generalize, and I'm sure people have different experiences, but for my own experience of the 2 people living in my house, this is a struggle for them. They find it really hard to read emotions and really hard to even describe their emotions. My husband also has 2 emotions, like happy and really, really pissed off. Those are his 2 emotions, basically. And EQ is about kind of getting much more in touch with our emotions. And over the years, I have kind of, I would say worked with them. It sounds like that's not quite the right phrase, but I've, tried to sort of share with them some ideas around how they can start to develop their emotional intelligence. And, quick story for my son, he finds it really hard to lie because he's Asperger's, so he can't cope with telling. So he deals in truth. So for him to tell a lie, he really struggles with that. And I came home from work 6 months ago, and I've been away a couple of days. I said to him, hey, Harry, did you miss me? And he looked at me, and I could see the anguish on his face between, I know I should probably tell a white lie here because I've learned about this, but I really need to tell the truth. And I sort of said to him, it's okay, you can tell me the truth. And he sort of said, no, I haven't missed you, Mama, because you weren't away long enough. But if you'd been away longer, I would definitely have missed you then. And that's an example of, a few years ago, he just said, no, I haven't missed you. And that would have been it. Whereas now he kind of caveats it with the, yes, because you haven't been away long enough. So you can learn to be more emotionally intelligent. Right, going to get you talking, thinking. Who springs to mind when you think of someone with a high EQ? So Justin, I'm going to come to you. Is there anyone that you think of springs to mind when you think of someone with a high EQ? So I've put there a couple of obvious candidates, well, they might not be, but they are for me. Yoda is very wise, very in touch with his emotions.
I love that combination of the wisdom of Yoda and the wisdom of the Dalai Lama. Well, it's funny you put the Dalai Lama up there because one of the things that strikes me when we talk about emotional intelligence, and when you look at the whole picture and all of the various aspects and qualities that people with high emotional intelligence demonstrate, it can be a little bit dispiriting because you can kind of go, oh my God, really? And so for me, I think emotional intelligence is, the theory is really helpful. And also we need to look through a lens of, as we said last week, look at ourselves through a lens of kindness and compassion when we are assessing our own level of emotional intelligence, because the ideal is kind of enlightenment. So when you talk about full 100% gold standard EQ, you are actually talking about the Buddha or the Dalai Lama or whoever else you believe has achieved full enlightenment. That's not really a state that most of us can expect to achieve on a daily basis, and that's fine. A bit like Salvador Dali said about perfection, don't be afraid of perfection because you'll never attain it. It's kind of like, don't worry. It's the same thing with emotional intelligence. For me, is like, don't worry if you're far off from being perfect in all of the various categories or aspects of emotional intelligence, because you're a normal human being. So welcome to the human race. Yes, does that make sense, Ems?
That's a really good point. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, these are kind of like icons of emotional intelligence, but probably quite a long way from most of us.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Yoda is a fictional character, but the Dalai Lama, I mean, that is all he does every day. That's what he's been doing for as long as he's been alive, is practicing. And I think that's a helpful link to why some of us don't experience high levels of intelligence. That's not to say that we don't have them within us, but it is about habits. And if we grow up and we're not helped by the people who are surrounding us by good practice in terms of emotional intelligence, we follow their habits and their behaviors. And so when we grow up and we kind of go, well, maybe that way of thinking about things isn't helpful. Maybe that way of understanding the world isn't actually true. And there's another way. And that's when the practice of exploring emotional intelligence becomes really helpful, isn't it? Because you realize, oh, actually, a lot of the way in which I deal with the world is based on assumptions and rules that I've created unconsciously through my interaction with the world and with the people around me. And I can just change them. And actually, I can automatically release my own inner emotional intelligence rather than having to learn it. For me, that's just a particular viewpoint that I have, and that relates to resilience.
That's really interesting. I haven't really thought about it in that way before. That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah. Have we got anything coming up on the chat, Katie? Has anyone come up with some good ideas of perhaps some real life people who are emotionally intelligent?
But by all means, if anyone thinks of anyone they'd like to add, pop it to the chat and we can make sure that's shared.
Okay. So what about low EQ? So again, two fictional characters here. I've probably been really kind. Probably could have put Trumpy up on here as well, couldn't we, if we wanted to? But and it's not really very fair putting Sheldon up because he's definitely Asperger's. But I just thought, if you watch The Big Bang Theory, his reaction does kind of, that's someone that's perhaps the other end of the scale, and it's kind of, it is not particularly good with emotional intelligence, and Homer's not great with it either. Trump is a great example of someone that's pretty low on emotional intelligence. It's really interesting, actually, Justin, don't you think about this, watching how the leaders around the world are coping with the whole COVID crisis, because I've seen some writings about how female leaders are responding in quite a different way, and a more emotionally intelligent way. And I'm not going to get into debate whether that's true or not, but there's that whole piece around, isn't there, around boys don't cry, and Boris has kind of gone down with the kind of war mentality, and it's all about fighting and war. The language he's using is kind of that sort of we're in a war, and compared to the response from say the New Zealand Prime Minister, it's very, very different. And I wonder what we could learn from the way that our world leaders are responding to COVID from kind of an emotional intelligence point of view. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Justin. I've just kind of put you on the spot there, but
yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. There's two approaches, isn't there? And one seems to be a very adversarial approach. So making the virus the enemy, an enemy fought and overcome. And I mean, I remember early days, Boris Johnson saying things like, we'll send COVID, we'll send it scuttling away, we'll vanquish it from it's the sort of strange thing, understanding that the virus isn't a thing or a person with an attitude or a belief about, it's a virus. So personifying it as the enemy is, I just think, is really unhelpful. And what I've liked about some of the other approaches has been a more emotionally intelligent approach, which is your point that you made earlier about emotional intelligence is about a sensitivity both to your own needs, but also to other people's needs. And by thinking about the bigger picture in terms of not just people in the relevant country and what they might be suffering, but more broadly speaking as well, and seeing this as an opportunity to collectively come together rather than an opportunity to fight something, seems quite intrinsic. And certainly in the US and the UK approach has been to adopt this kind of we will fight them on the beaches approach. Which,
absolutely, yeah, interesting.
It's interesting you use the New Zealand example, Emma. We've actually had just come up in the chat an example of someone with high EQ as being Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand. Also, another example is Simon Sinek as having a high EQ.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that, and thanks for reminding me what Jacinda's name was, because I've forgotten, which is really bad. But I am, of an age where I forget things. Okay, I just think it's interesting to think about role models, because I think that's a great place to start. Is looking at people that you think really get this stuff right, and learning from them. So that's why I wanted to kind of introduce that there. I've got a bunch of slides here. I won't go into it all, but it's kind of there for reference, really. And there's some sort of traits of people who tend to have lower EQ versus higher EQ there. So, and it's interesting how, they're often quite related. So when does assertiveness become aggression, for example? When does ambition become demanding? When does someone who's driven become egotistical? And I know, for example, anyone that knows me would say I kind of straddle that line between being seen as bossy and being seen as strong-willed. And it's something that I have to think about. So some people would definitely describe me as strong-willed, and that would be a positive thing, whereas other people would say, no, she's really bossy and she's a bit of a nightmare, and that would be a negative thing. So it's kind of like that whole strength overplayed piece can be a weakness. And I think I like this slide because it sort of really gets you thinking about how some of these behaviors are quite closely related, but they're just kind of manifested in a slightly different way, which I think is interesting to think about. It's the traits of low EQ versus the traits of high EQ, and just worth thinking about, perhaps ones that jump out and resonate with you, where you're at, and where you perhaps go from being strong-willed into being bossy in my case, or where I go from being charming into not being as good a listener as I could be. Justin, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that slide.
I do, yeah, and I love the self-disclosure. Well done. We could all go through. Oh yeah,
yeah.
And of course, the other thing that factors into that is people receive us in different ways. So you might communicate with one person in a particular manner, and for them that's perfectly clear, and it's, you know, and someone else might be like, whoa, that's a bit, and so it's not fixed. So we, of course, in communication, we flex our style, and that's one of the things about when you have a degree of emotional intelligence, it gives you the freedom to flex. When you're not allowing your emotional intelligence to shine through, you're kind of stuck, and the world is constantly against you, and there's nothing you can do, and you're kind of stuck in permanent victim. But just a little bit of space for you to go, actually, maybe this isn't just all about me. Maybe this is about someone else. Maybe I could change. That little amount of emotional intelligence opens you up to a massive amount of gain in terms of the quality of your relationships, doesn't it? Because that ability to just notice that you create that little space that we talk about. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, Ems, is this comment from Jacinda. And Katie said thanks for it already, but you know, Jacinda says, high EQ, luckily a few of my previous managers and colleagues. So that is fantastic, and lucky you, and I'm delighted to hear it. And in some ways, when we ask about that question, about famous people who have high EQ, it's kind of hard to know because we don't experience them on an everyday basis, but we can think of people in our own sphere, and that can be a brilliant guide for us, can't it? To think, well, what would, you know, whoever it was, what would Emma do in this situation? She's pretty good at that. What would she do? You know, channel your inner, whoever that colleague was for you, Jacinda, channel your inner Emma, for example, at moments when you think you might be likely to be a bit bossy rather than clear. So thinking about someone you have in your own sphere who demonstrates EQ, I think a high EQ is really helpful, actually, because that's you can relate to that.
Yeah, really good point there, Justin. You know, going back to the point we made at the beginning about the multifaceted nature of EQ, it's not just about yourself, but about how, you know, how reading other people as well. I think that's a really good point in terms of flexing, aspects of your personality depending on the reaction you get from the people. Like, you know, sort of, with one person you might be seen as strong-willed, but then the next person, that they're not receiving that in the same way. So it's a really, really good point about flexing your style to read the reaction they're having to you is really critical, I think, in terms of, you know, developing that EQ. Cool. Okay. So traits of high emotional intelligence. So again, I'm just looking at time. We're whizzing through time today, so I'm not going to go into loads of detail, but start to see overlap between concepts and ideas that we've talked about previously. So first of all, it starts with that self-awareness, that honesty, you know, being honest about, you know, your own emotions. And I mean, I had a meltdown this week because my husband came back with the shopping and we hadn't got some stuff on the list that I wanted, and my reaction to it was really, you know, completely over the top, given that he'd just forgotten to buy a few tomatoes and a cucumber. But practicing that self-awareness, right? Okay, why did I react in that way? What was that all about? And being even able to label the emotion, I think, is just a good practice to get into, just to kind of do that self-awareness piece, because that's where all this starts. And knowing how emotions are caused, so what makes me feel this way, what triggers me, and just getting comfortable with that. And again, it's that, go back to the self-care piece. It's not about trying to be perfect. It's not about trying to completely manage all of your emotions. It's just sort of saying, I know that I'm triggered by X, and I have to be kind of mindful of that, because when someone does that, it really makes me feel a certain way, and I've got to kind of, you know, deal with that and regulate that. Self-regulation is the, you know, rather than going mental over the fact that my husband didn't come back with the tomatoes and the cucumber, the self-regulation bit would have been to just recognize it earlier on, label it, give it a name, and just have some tools, some coping mechanisms to remove myself from the situation, rather than kicking off and having an absolute fit at him for not bringing my tomatoes and cucumber back. And then empathy, we talk about empathy as a superpower. We talked about it on week 1 and probably week 2, and it's just that really practicing that skill of how might this seem to them? So how might it have come across to my family when I kicked off about the vegetable situation, and, you know, putting myself in their shoes, and obviously with a lot of apologizing afterwards. But, you know, again, it's not about trying to be perfect. It's just about sort of practicing these areas to really, you know, hone our ability to be more, you know, emotionally aware. Other traits, you know, people who have high IQ tend to be more motivated and better at decision making. They're more intuitive. It's a bit, I feel a bit, you know, should I really have included this one? But the number 8, the evidence does show that people that have high EQ tend to be more popular, more friendly, more involved with peers, more sought after, because they know how to get on with people. They know how to interact with people. And this is not an extrovert introvert thing. This is about that kind of that emotional intelligence piece rather than the extrovert introvert piece. Tend to be more pro-social, tend to have a more balanced life as well. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on any of those, Justin, you wanted to pick out in particular.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on your the point number 8, because as a self-confessed extrovert, you know, I'm Justin, I'm an extrovert, sorry. I work a lot of my, I'm always trying to think about, if I was an introvert, how would I be receiving this? And especially when I'm, you know, if I'm running courses. And this point about number 8 is so important, that it is not the same as extroversion. And the person I like to use as an example of this is Ken Robinson, who, you know, has done some amazing TED Talks. Yeah. Now, he is, by his own definition, quite an extreme introvert. He, you know, that's his own kind of assessment of himself. And yet he shows extraordinary warmth and intuition and care and empathy, and is, I bet, an incredibly sought after person, both in his family sphere and certainly in his professional sphere. So I'm really pleased that you added that caveat, because you could think popular, outgoing, friendly, well, that's not me. That is, that it's not extroversion. It is about the quality of the attention you pay to yourself and you pay to others. And you can do it in a quiet way. In fact, there's some argument to say you're almost more likely to be doing that if you're introvert, because you're less, hey, it's all about me.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Good point. Okay, so developing your EQ is about, as we said, being able to recognize and regulate and manage your emotions, so that they're not harmful. It's not saying, you know, don't cry. It's saying, you know, just recognize when they can be destructive or detrimental, and figure out what you do with that. It's about connecting with others using non-verbal communication. It's not just about what you say, it's all the other stuff. It's reading people's reactions, their face, their, you know, an obvious one. If I'm doing some training, a lot of people sat in a room with their arms folded, I think this isn't quite working, I need to do something here. Using humour is really helpful for EQ, and play to deal with challenges. Just getting a bit real. So, you know, sometimes we talk about EQ, one of the kind of coping mechanisms that we talk about when you've got kind of a really big fearful emotion, is to kind of think about, well, what's the worst that could happen here? So this crisis situation that we're in, that probably isn't a great question to ask, but often we kind of catastrophize, and that kind of it inhibits our ability to deal with our emotions effectively. Recognizing emotional responses in others, and again, we can get really good at this. You really can develop the skill. We're going to have a go at this in a minute, actually. And the ability to quickly reduce stress. And this is where this kind of links to, you know, the field of resilience, is that having good EQ helps you to reduce stress in a much more effective and timely way, which obviously helps to build resilience as well. So some points I wanted to make there. So I've got a question for you here. And use a chat facility to help us out here. What emotions have you experienced over the past few days? Can you name them? And then you don't have to put this in the chat, but I just want you to reflect on how easy or difficult you find this. So just going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. So what emotions have you experienced over the last few days, and can you name them? And then just have a think about if you found that easy or difficult. So Justin, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
No, that's, I was just typing, but I'll share them instead.
Yeah.
So elation was an emotion I definitely experienced. So Emma and Katie know that someone in my family has been very ill, and they have just been, we've just found out that they're recovering. And there was an extraordinary sense of elation, and that was mixed with relief, because of course, when you really start to dig into the detail of emotions, you find that they're overlapped and they're blended and they're rich, which is your point about, you know, Ted saying, I'm happy, I'm angry, or I'm sad. You know, actually when you start to get in there, they're rich and complex and nuanced. So I would say that moment, I had a mix of a whole load of emotions, but the strongest ones were a mixture of elation and relief at the same time. So positive, both positive emotions. But prior to that, of course, I would have been experiencing anxiety, worry, fear, despair, you know, a lot of very negative emotions as well. And I think part of the resilience practice that we've spoken about is to do what you're doing, which is to notice what you're feeling and give it a name. And there's lots of research, as you know, Emma, into the power of, psychologists call it labeling. So labeling emotions gives us that little bit of distance. So you go, it's the difference between saying, I am anxious, to say, well, I'm feeling anxious. And then you go a step further saying, I notice that I'm feeling anxious. You know, you keep on going. We've got to keep coming in on this, on the group chat.
Cool.
So we've got sadness, anxiety, happiness, anger, irritation, gratitude. Just a few that have come through on the chat.
I love lots of. Sorry, I love the specificity of particularly of irritation, because there's you know, irritation is closely allied to annoyance. It's also allied to frustrated. It's also, but they're slightly different. To be irritated by someone is different to be annoyed. I love that once you really get into it, you start to realize the different flavors and textures that emotions have. And it's kind of fun, actually, then, rather than being afraid of them. You can sort of, you can explore them. I mean, look, it's lovely list coming through pride as well. I mean, that's fantastic, Katie. But what a lovely, warm, opening, welcoming emotion to be experiencing, and alongside frustration, irritation.
What children do to you?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, yeah. I'm making a guess that, you know, I know you've got kids at home, so you'd probably be feeling proud and also incredibly irritated by them.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. All intrinsically linked there.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, on the irritated? I'm definitely getting irritated. My kids are back at school this week, as in back at school online, and my son came down yesterday after finishing his schoolwork, and as a treat I said, okay, you can go on the Xbox, and he was sat next to me, like, just clicking on the controller, and it was just doing my nutting, and I was like so over the top irritated by something so trivial. And again, it's like, I said in the end, I said, you can't, I'm sorry, you have to do that later, because it's just doing my head in. I don't know why. I haven't got time to explore it right now. I've got stuff to do, but I just cannot listen to you click on that controller any longer. And it's just like the weirdest things that are irritating me. And there's loads of memes around, isn't there, about, you know, getting annoyed by people breathing or what have you. And I think, you know, that's a very good one. Irritability is definitely on the up for me in my situation at the moment anyway. But I think it's interesting. It's a really interesting activity to do this. And it seems a little bit, you know, a little bit, well, how is that helpful when you start talking about, you know, naming your emotions? But as Justin just said, it's a really important part of building EQ and building resilience, to be able to name them and remove yourself from them a little bit, give yourself a little bit of distance. And depending on how easy or difficult you find it, if you find it really easy, then that's great. If you find it difficult, just get in the practice of doing it. I do, you know, sometimes I do really struggle with this. Sometimes I think, how are you feeling? I go, I don't know. And that's quite common. So some days I can name them all. I go, yeah, I'm bored, I'm irritated, you know, what have you. And other days I say, I don't really know how I'm feeling. And it's a good question to ask yourself. So get in the habit of you know, spending a little bit of reflection time thinking about your emotions during the day, and how easy or difficult you're finding to name them. Okay, so going to do a little quiz now. Got a bunch of people displaying emotions we're going to put up. And we've got a little poll, and we're going to, just a little bit of fun, like a little online pub quiz here. Any of you do, like, I do the peak brain training thing because I'm really worried about losing my mind as I get older. It's one of my biggest fears. And so I do peak brain training. And in the peak brain training, it's all been kind of designed by really clever psychologists and neuroscientists. They have one of the facets of peak is the emotional intelligence. And you have to do this on peak. You have to basically recognize emotions. So what we're going to do is put up a person who's displaying an emotion. We can debate afterwards whether it's right or wrong or not. But I'm going to get Katie to put up the poll. Are you able to put up the poll, Katie? Yeah, and you can. This first picture, is it fear, concern, or shock they're displaying? Can you see that? Can everyone see that? Okay.
I'm just having to rearrange my screen, Emma. I don't know if anyone else.
Okay.
So I can keep the poll and the chat and the face visible.
I know, there's a lot going on, isn't there? A lot going on. Okay, so hopefully you've all filled that out. We're going to move on to picture number 2, if I can. Yes, still
We haven't had any votes come
picture
through
number
yet.
2.
So.
Oh, haven't we?
We submit
No.
at the end, I think, by the looks of it, Katie.
Ah, fine. Okay, ignore me.
Yeah, don't go through to the end. So picture number 2, what are they feeling? Are they frustrated, upset, or angry? Have a go at that. And you can always borrow these for your, if you're around for your quiz at the weekend. If you're doing quizzes like me, I'm sort of running out of subject matters now for my quiz. We've done Hastings and St Leonard's Knowledge. We've done logos. We've done paleontology that my son did that round. That was a bit difficult for everyone, I've got to be honest. Picture number 3. What do you think this person is displaying here? What emotion do you think that one is? Some are definitely easier than others, I think. And I have to say, the Peak app that I've got is actually, they're a lot harder on there.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's had a go at that, but yeah, there's a few games on there that help you develop your emotional intelligence or certain aspects of it. Picture number 4. What's this person displaying? What do you think they're displaying? Is it pride? Is it contempt? Is it concern? Okay, let's go to picture number 5. What do you think there? I think that's an easy one. I think I find that easier, and I've got the answers. And I'm still looking at them going, oh, I don't know actually. What are they showing there? So picture number 5. What emotion are they showing? Picture number 6. Any thoughts on that? It's more difficult, I think. Okay, picture number 7. Which emotion do you think is associated with picture number 7? Oh, sorry, gone ahead too much there. And this is picture number 8. What do we think they're showing? Okay, let's give everybody a second to input their answers, and I'll just run back over them, and then when we share this, we'll give you the answers as well in the slide. So let's go to number 1 first of all. So number 1 was fear, which I think, it's interesting, that one, because I'm like, I don't know if I'd have said that, but okay. So we've got a few different thoughts there. Yeah, I think it could be concern. Number 2 is it's actually anger, according to the clever people I got this off. But I think, yeah, I mean, just look frustrated. It could be frustration, couldn't it? Sure. Picture number 3 is embarrassment. So again, we've got a range of responses there. Picture number 4 is pride. I think that's equal between sort of pride and contempt there. Picture number 5 is surprise. Everyone got that one. That was more of an easy one, wasn't it? Picture number 6 was contempt. Yeah, but that I completely get. You could take that as annoyance, someone being annoyed with you. picture number, whatever we're on now, is amusement. So I think, yeah, most people got that right. And the last one was compassion. Okay, so just a bit of fun there, just to kind of, get you thinking about this this idea of naming emotions. Okay, we're almost at time, so I'm just going to fly through this last bit really quickly. So last week we talked about good energy management, and we had Daniela on talking about nutrition. So I just wanted to mention stress today, because EQ, as I said back at the beginning, is a really helpful tool that we have. We work on EQ to develop our ability to cope with stress, essentially. So I won't read all this through, but just to kind of make the point on the third bullet here is that emotional intelligence helps us to respond to stress in a much more proactive way. It helps us to calm ourselves down more effectively when we're feeling overwhelmed. And as we know, stress is critical in terms of helping to build resilience. That resilience we talked about at the beginning, in terms of resilience in the moment. When something hits us from nowhere, we've got to respond to it, and that the reaction that we have, being able to manage that initial stress that we feel when something hits from nowhere, that in the moment resilience, EQ is going to help you to do that. So yeah, a couple of tips here. So obvious stuff as usual, but psychology is so just going back to naming the emotions, being able to name that emotion, like I'm feeling really stressed and that's making me feel fearful or anxious or irritated or whatever it might be. Everyone has a kind of a different way of responding to stress, or it might make you kind of go really quiet or retract from the world. Identifying the stress response. So yeah, what is your response to stress? And then looking at what stress busting techniques can work for you. So that goes back to the stuff we've talked about previous week. So the obvious stuff around getting enough sleep and eating the right things, but also some of the tools that we've talked about the last few weeks. So whether it's looking at your playlist, the stuff that makes you feel happy, maybe putting on a great piece of music that you love, or going for a walk, or whatever it is for you, just having that stuff at hand so that when you are recognizing your stress and you're identifying your stress response, you've got some tools ready, willing and able to help you to move on from that initial emotional response. If you're interested in EQ, you can find out what your EQ is by taking an online quiz. And I've shared a couple of free resources here. There's loads out there, but there are a couple of free resources there as well. So mindful that we are pretty much at time. So we'll share the recording and the slides with you as normal. But any kind of final thoughts from you, Justin, today on what we've talked about?
Well, final thought for me is the value of self-awareness. You mentioned it earlier, is self-awareness underpins it all. And, creating a little window of self-awareness is it's a bit like a pinhole camera. A little bit of light comes through, but on the other side, it's vast. So for me, and given that this is a 45-minute, quick immersion in the world of emotional intelligence, EQ, what I would be taking away is the one thing you can do really easily is your self-awareness, because that's simply pausing and asking yourself, what's going on for me? What do I notice about what I'm feeling? And then turning the lens outwards and going, what do I notice about how they're feeling? And the answer is always there once you remember to stop and create that little space.
Yeah, brilliant. That is a fantastic, really tangible, practical tip to end on. So thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you everybody for joining us again for this week's Wellbeing Lunch. Really appreciate you making the time to be here. We are hopefully going to have our mindfulness person next week, aren't we, Justin? We're working on that. We will let you know in due course if we're able to get them on board next week or in a future week. Have a wonderful Thursday and a wonderful weekend, and spread the word as well. Tell people about these lunches, and thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it, and we will hopefully see you all soon. So happy Thursday, everybody. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.